Working with the wood, it's a hard wood. You know, the sanding application was something like I've never done before. It was a very slow labor process. But you know what, I mean, once you get the finish after the sanding, the rough sanding, getting all the saw marks out of it and really getting the grain of the wood to show, I mean, it's almost like, you know, people say that you're fruits of your labor, you know, like a farmer. You know, it's the time and effort that they put into their fields, and all of a sudden they get their crops as their production, and, you know, harvest time, and, you know, it's the same thing. It's just, yeah, you take this piece of wood, and all of a sudden what emerges from it is very, very unique. You know, it's just, it's a different type of wood. You know, it's got some similarities of other wood, but the grain structure, I mean, there's so many different patterns of grain that you can see in this wood and how it comes out. And once you start putting the oil process, the tung oil on, it just, I mean, it just has a face. It just stands out and stares at you, and it's quite unique. When it came time to the epoxy, it was funny because there were times where I'd start filling some of those cavities where I thought I had the entire cavity cleaned out and so forth, and all of a sudden you see these little bugs crawling out because they didn't like the smell. I didn't like the smell of the epoxy. They didn't like it either. They came crawling out like you wouldn't believe. That during the sanding process, you know, you'd see just a little pinhole, which, you know, and then you start, you know, sanding a little bit deeper, and all of a sudden, next thing you know, you got a trail. I mean, and that little pinhole now all of a sudden branched off into several different avenues, okay, until finally then you end up with a big pocket or a big area where there was a bunch of it was like a fine powder that they would chew up in the wood and stuff, and you know, which was challenging because, you know, you think you're done, okay, with an area, and all of a sudden that area now requires additional sanding and additional sanding. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times where I thought I was done and all of a sudden I find a trail. I was filling in the epoxy from the backside, and I didn't, you know, I thought I had everything taped up on the backside, and, you know, come back a couple hours later and I could see it was, you know, seeping through, and where it actually was seeping through is probably about 8 inches away from this area on the other side. There was just a little pinhole or a little crack that was in the grain of the wood where the stuff was seeping out.
I really believe this is an example of functional art. I think this is a piece of artwork that we are going to be able to use our entire lives and through generations. The beauty of it will be there every time we walk into our dining room, every time we have a friend over, every time we celebrate Thanksgiving or Christmas or a birthday. This is going to be the centerpiece. Well, I was in Tucson, Arizona, visiting my in-laws, Sandy Allen and Dennis Allen, and they live near a little community called Tubac, T-U-B-A-C, and it's a resort community, sort of, and they had this really neat shopping center, all these interesting art shops, and one of the shops had these beautiful mesquite tables. I'd never seen them before, and I'd never seen this grain or the turquoise that was in the cracks. I know 2 Dennises in the family. Both are really fine craftsmen. And I thought, well, you never know. What if I approached them and said, what if I bought the wood? Is this something you'd be interested in building for us? And then I ended up serving as sort of the contractor on the deal. Even though Dennis is doing 99.999% of the work, I did a lot of the legwork up until then. It was a job to get the wood, finding the right slabs. It was a job figuring out, does it have to be kiln dried or regular dried? It was a job of figuring out, well, what should I really pay for this stuff? It's so different than other wood. You can't compare it even to oak or mahogany. It is a different animal. It sells for different prices. It's more if it's in slabs, it's less if it's just cut in planks. So my father-in-law did some checking. He tells me, call this place in Tucson. They might be able to help. So I call them, and the guy says, we have mesquite, we only have it in planks. I'm like, my wife wants slabs so it could be bookended. And he goes, I know a guy who does that. Call this guy, his name is Tom. He's in Tucson as well, owns a small lumberyard. So I call this guy up. He picks up the phone right away and he goes, you're never going to believe this. I'm leaving for Chicago tomorrow morning with a pair of slabs. Here they are.
you know, a lot of these little holes like this that we filled in with the goopus or the bondo, a lot of times what happens is, you know, you don't know what's in this wood inside, and you think you've got it filled up to the top, and all of a sudden, you know, 5-6 hours later, I mean, it's sunk in. And in most cases, it was only a guess of where it was going. You know, it was going somewhere, so evidently there's trails and cavities that are beyond what we can see here. Actually, this is part of the tree limb, okay? And all I had to remove here basically was the bark that was on the exterior of the tree limb, but this actually was, I got all 4 of these corner pedestals out of that one limb. What I did is I had to rip it, and I had to split it in roughly inch and a half thickness. So in addition to, you know, it took many hours of cutting it one way and then ripping it another way, flipping it over, ripping it this way, and then by the time I ripped all of these pieces, there's all 4 pieces of the curvature, I got all 4 of them out of that one tree branch. Okay, so it was getting kind of tedious because I didn't know if I was going to make it, but I did. This is probably some of the most enjoyable work that I've done. Okay, I mean, it just a lot of people ask me is, you know, why do you do what you do? And I you know, I always say, you know what, when I'm done, I take 2 steps back and look at it and say, hey, you know, I put this thing together, you know. And one of my nephews say basically is he sees pictures of some of the stuff he does and he refers to it as my signature. You know, that's my uncle's signature there.